Welcome to the Spa Girls podcast, the self-publishing podcast for authors. You're in the right place for the best writing, marketing, and publishing advice, plus interviews with industry experts and best-selling authors. I'm Cheryl Phipps.
I'm Sha Barrett.
I'm Wendy Vella. And I'm Trudy J. And this week we have an awesome guest. We have Sierra Simone. Say hello.
Yay!
Yay!
Hi everyone. Thank you for having me.
No worries
You're
at
welcome.
all. Now, Sierra's going to talk to us. She actually, I heard her talk at Romance Author Mastermind RAM last year and loved her talk. It was one of my favorite talks out of everything. And there were some really good talks there. So, you have to know this is going to be an amazing podcast. And Sierra was talking to us about how to build an amazing brand, a bespoke author brand, which, like something a little bit more niche, something a bit different to kind of the mainstream. And that really spoke to me. So I'm going to read out your bio and then we will get on with the questions. So Sierra Simone is a USA Today, and by the way, it's 10-time USA Today, and Wall Street Journal best-selling author and former librarian who spent too much time reading romance novels at the information desk. That's exactly what I would do, I'm just saying. Her notable works include Priest, American Queen, and Misadventures of a Curvy Girl, and she's been published in 12 different languages. She lives with her husband and family in Kansas City. So I just want you to
Welcome.
start out by talking about how you got into writing and self-publishing, and then we'll dig into the actual topic.
So I first started writing around college. I got my degree in creative writing. By the way, don't recommend that for anyone. Please get your degree in something that will get you health insurance and pay your bills. I basically majored in a hobby. It felt like, it was that or basket weaving, I guess. And I sold my first book in 2012. I was writing young adult literature under a different name. And I quickly realized that I was sort of entering into a publishing machine that I wasn't very well equipped for. I was 24 when I sold my first book. I didn't really have any experience advocating for myself, or I didn't even really have a good sense of myself as a storyteller, like what excited me, like why I was writing so much as I just knew that I loved to do it. And so I very quickly became kind of disillusioned with the machine. And I think I was like revising my second contracted book. And I told my critique partner, I've really kind of fallen out of love with writing. Like I still love writing, but writing to be published is agony right now. I don't know what to do. And she said, well, you really need to like find something that you can work on that's just for you. That's like, because it's not writing that you're out of love with, it's sort of the publishing machine. And so do something that's just for you that you don't have to worry about a literary agent saying yes to or your editor saying yes to. And so I sat down and I wrote what all the young people are clamoring for, which is fan fiction of the 2011 version of Jane Eyre. And I wrote my Jane Eyre fan fiction and had so much fun. I was just writing like little scenes here and there. And the same critique partner said, have you ever thought about kind of turning this into like an original story? And again, you don't have to worry about what your agent says. She doesn't represent romance. She definitely doesn't represent historical erotica. In fact, to my knowledge, barely anyone represents that because it's like a very niche genre. And you don't have to worry about your contracts. Like you can just publish this under a new name. And I said, okay, I think I could do that. Like that sounds fun. And for the first time, I was having fun again while I was writing. And so I sat down for about 5 minutes and I picked a name. I grew up on a street called Sierra Circle. Simone was my middle name. And so Sierra Simone, it took me like a few minutes. If I had known that I was going to have to write Sierra Simone on my taxes, I probably would have like thought a little
Yeah.
more carefully about what it was going to be. But I made myself a promise as Sierra. I said, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to go buy a domain name, if I'm going to make an Amazon page, if I'm going to doctor up a stock photo that's going to be fake me, as my profile picture, then I'm not going to bother doing it unless I'm writing things that I want to write. And so I made myself a promise that I was only going to write what I wanted to write because I already had this other writing career where I was being sort of, put into boxes that I didn't really want to be put into, that I was trying to make other people happy in a way that was kind of harming my creativity. And that's what I did. And I'm happy to say that, it's been gosh, 10 years. I think this is my 10-year anniversary. I started publishing in January of 2025. The For 10 years I've been able to keep that promise to myself. But as we're gonna, talk about, like part of keeping that promise to myself meant that a lot of publishing advice that indie authors get wasn't gonna fit me in exactly the same way. And I just had to, over the years, I've had many cycles of grieving that I can't just pick one thing and write 17 versions of that one thing, that I can't write the same book over and over again. Because if you can, like if that's how you're wired, if that energizes you, it does mean that downstream a lot of other decisions get easier. But I did it the hard way, where I was like, I'm going to write in whatever genre I feel like, with wildly different marketing, wildly different covers. And yeah, just I guess I'll just fumble my way through it. And I did. I'm still here 10 years later. So like there is a path for those of us who fumble.
Yeah.
I like that idea of writing something completely different because
Mm.
sometimes, when you've been writing a long time and you do have an obligation, it's just like, oh, you do lose the love.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And not everyone is wired like this. I started taking classes and being part of the Patreon community of a writing coach named Becca Syme. And I think the Better Faster Academy is the name of her company. And so for anyone who's listening to this, I really starting to like engage with her material and her workshops and stuff really changed me. It's like one of the two major turning points in my career. But one of the things I've really seen is there are writers who are just so energized by I guess the iteration on very similar themes. Like they would love to write a seaside, small town romance, for the rest of their lives. They could do five of those a year and be really happy. And so I am like really I'm glad that I love that journey for them. But unfortunately, it's just not me. I think that I have too much novelty seeking maybe. Like I do get bored and I have to move on. And there are books that I've written that the process of writing them changed me in such a way that I can't go back and write something similar. Like I wrote Priest and it shifted something inside of me creatively and spiritually, and so I couldn't go back and write Priest again. Any attempt I made would just necessarily be a different book because now I'm a different writer.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's
Interesting.
interesting. That changing
Mm,
you, it's.
We're big fans of Becca here. Just saying we,
yeah,
Oh,
yeah, we
hugely.
we'd have her on every week if we could, but then that would be feel mean that, we're
Yeah, it
getting
would
free
be.
coaching every week, so we have to.
I know. I always have to tell people, like, I promise I don't get a commission every time
Yeah.
I say Becca's name, because I reference her work and the work of her team so often. But
Mm,
it really is, if you are, whether you're thinking about your writing or whether you're thinking about your career, there's so much depth of advice that's really personalized, I guess. And so in this industry, it's very easy to find prescriptive, one size fits all advice. And it's very easy to feel like a failure if you're not able to implement it for your work. And so what I really appreciate about Becca's approach is that it's more individualized. It's really about like how do you best operate? And now how can we optimize your business to fit that instead of trying to change yourself to fit into this like ideal indie author shape.
Mm.
Yeah.
That is the best thing about it. It's like you get to it's about you personally, and I love that. So now that we're on Becca, quickly, can you tell us what your top five strengths are? Just
Oh, yes. Yes. Okay. So I am number one, context. Number two, intellection. So intellection, very common among writers.
mm,
yeah,
I'm not very unique in that. Number three is input. Number four is learner. And then number five is connectedness.
yeah.
mm. Okay.
Um, the hard thing about my strengths is I only have one executing strength in my top 10, and it's at seven, and it's belief. And so if I don't have a sense of belief in something, it's really difficult for me to take action on it. And so there are things that are like, emails where I kind of have to sort of have feelings like, okay, I believe that a good author, would try to be as prompt with her emails as she can be. And so I try to use my belief in that way. But it is very, very difficult for me to work on books, for example, that I don't believe in. And so I have, some projects that I've started particularly projects that have been like for an anthology, right? Or something like that, where it's not an organic idea of mine. It's just like, okay, everyone is writing a book about female rage or writing a story about female rage. And so it's like not really my prompt, it's not really my timeline, and I don't have any time for intellection to kind of like do its thing. Those are projects where even though I might believe in the cause, which is, why I signed up to do the anthology, the story hasn't had time to sort of gather its own belief around it. And then I just have to say, I'm so sorry. Like I genuinely can't write something unless that part of me is engaged in the story.
Mm. That's
I
awesome. And
understand
that's
that.
so good to know that about yourself, because if you
Mm.
didn't know that, there would be a sense, you'd almost be beating yourself up. You'd be like, well, why can't I do this thing that everyone else is doing? And that
Yes,
self-knowledge is really important. Yeah. Yeah.
I completely agree. And this is again not to diminish people who are I have a few friends who are incredible collaborators, and
Mhm.
they really they're really energized by the process of collaboration, by working with a group, by taking, say, Star Wars intellectual property and adapting it into a specific kind of outline that they've been given by the Star Wars story group. Like, I know authors who are just, they really respond to that, right? Like, they really resonate with that kind of style of work. And so, it's not to say that like, anyone who's not charged with belief every time they sit down to the keyboard is doing it wrong, but I think that the friction comes when you are personally receiving a lot of advice that is kind of antithetical to how you're wired.
Mm. Yeah, that is good. And one of the things you talked about in your talk at RAM was the three-legged stool, and how Kennedy Ryan had certain things that she had to have in a story before she could kind of start it, even like before she could even consider a book, she had to have these three things. What are your three things? Like, what are your things that you
Oh my gosh.
do you
I
know?
know, I'm like
Putting
trying
her on the
to
spot.
think. I know,
Do you
right?
want me to
Well,
say
I'm trying
what
to think.
Kennedy's were
What
in that?
were, yeah, like
Yeah,
we should talk about Kennedy's because I remember it was creative conviction
yeah.
and
Intellectual
curiosity.
curiosity, and then artistic
Yes.
urgency. So she has to
Yes.
believe in it, right? Like she probably has belief as one of her top ones, doesn't she? I don't know. She
Yes.
was,
I think belief is like number two or number three for her.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
So she every time she starts a project, she has to have, yeah, these three things, and she won't, like, intellectual curiosity, and like they're very specific things. Artistic urgency, I'm not even sure what that means.
No,
um
I was actually,
I,
I'm glad you said that because I have no clue. Someone help me here.
yeah. So I think for her, there's a feeling like, and th this is me kind of extrapolating from conversations that we've shared like on the stage at RAM and stuff. So she could probably speak more accurately to this, but my feeling is that for her, she's always looking for opportunities in the world at large where storytelling would make a difference.
Ah,
So if you look at a lot of Kennedy's stories that are about, she had like her latest series, the Skyland series. The first book in that is about a stillbirth and a divorce and a depression, someone experiencing depression. She has books about intimate partner violence. She has books about climate change. And so I think for her, it's like the urgency comes from would storytelling add to this conversation? Like, is this timely? Is this something that we need to be engaging with right now, kind of as a culture? And I think that that's kind of where the urgency comes from. Is
yeah.
it timely? And I think also for her, she's very externally inspired. And so she talks about for Long Shot, the story that deals with intimate partner violence, there was a particular news story that came up, about domestic violence in professional sports. And for her, that was really activating. That was like kind of radicalizing, right? Here
Yeah.
are these women just sort of being absolutely left behind by these billion-dollar machines, and their abuse is constantly sort of swept under the rug because the priority is how do we keep male athletes profitable for us. And
Mm.
so I think that like she read about that and it was like, it was so radicalizing. It was like there's no other story I could tell right now because I'm sort of consumed with the need to dig into this.
Yeah, I remember
Um,
in the interview she did, That was with you, wasn't it? That was the evening
Yes.
one, yeah. And she said people said to her, look, why do you, have to go into these really controversial topics? Can't you just write a story? And she's like, I can't write a story without there being something that I
Yeah.
feel passionate about. Like she had to, like it was that was what the core of her was. If she didn't have that kind of thing that she wanted to get across, like as in that theme, I guess, that you're talking about, she wouldn't be able to write the story. And I thought that was interesting. That was just
Yeah.
such a strong belief thing going on.
Well, and I think what I enjoy about her three-legged stool metaphor and why I included it in the presentation is this idea that it's that like two portions of that wouldn't be enough, right? This sort of like I feel convicted about this and I'm curious about it, but also it feels like something I could have written at any other time, like or it feels like I'm not feeling the sort of reason why it needs to be the next thing I write right now. Like I'm not consumed by it. It's not
Yeah.
the thing I'm daydreaming about, even though like the themes are something that I'm really engaged with. And so I really resonate with that because when the longer you go in your career, the more opportunities there are to collaborate with people, to, traditionally publish books, all sorts of things. And so you really do have to start getting granular about what you're choosing and why to work on because there's only one of you and there's only so much time. And I, in particular, am slow. Kennedy also is a slower writer. And so we have to be extra, extra picky about what we choose because I can only write 2 books a year. So I have to be committed to
Yeah.
those 2 books. And if I waste that time on something that I sort of feel like, well, anyone could have written that. That story didn't
Yeah.
need me, it
Yeah.
didn't need me specifically. Then I can kind of feel bummed out because I'm like, oh, there's so many other things on the roster that I feel passionate about. But for me, I think my three-legged stool is more like um, is it obsessive? So is it something that is kind of obsessing me? I think that's sort of the urgency a little bit like Kennedy's, right? Like is it this idea that is so consuming that just having it inside of my head is like not enough? Like it has to be, I have to make it more part of my life. Is it transgressive? So like these are stories where, I'm sort of digging into like the liminal space between what we decide is okay and what we decide is not okay. I think Priest is a very good example, right? Like Priest has a very stark line between what's acceptable and what's not for, this character, right? Like he's not allowed to fall in love and have sex. But I'm really interested in not transgression for its own sake, but for sort of exploring why some of these things exist, like why some of these lines exist, why I'm trying to think of like what's the last thing I've written. I just wrote a professor romance, and so and it's his nanny, and so I'm kind of like, why not? Like why shouldn't the nanny and the single dad fall in love? I understand it's a bad idea 99% of the time, but what about for these 2 people? What about this 1% of the time? Maybe it's a great idea. And so I really like I'm sort of like an accidental heretic, and that I don't like heresy for its own sake, but I'm very curious about how we get to the rules that we have and like where do some of those rules come from? And so for me, that exploration of the forbidden kind of really has to be part of the story. I once had a well-meaning author friend. I had just published Sinner, which is about a rich businessman and a nun who's about to take her final vows. And she said, why couldn't this have been an age gap billionaire romance? Why did you have to bring God and religion and her being a nun into it? If you would just take out the God stuff, you would probably sell a lot more books. And she meant it helpfully, I think. I think she was trying to be like, here, let me help you further your career and give you some advice. You don't need this religious stuff in your books. And I thought about it and I was like, yeah, why can't I? Like what is the reason why I sort of there's a barrier between me being like, oh yeah, I'll just do that? And it's because for me that is the core of my sort of mission, I guess. I am interested in those transgressive aspects. They electrify me. To me that is the story. And so without them, it's just paper dolls, you know,
Yeah.
and there still might be amazing books, you know, inside of those tropes, but they're just not meant for me. They don't need me. They can find another author who's going to bring their own spin to it. So there has to be some element of the forbidden for me. And then I also think that probably my other leg of the stool would be like, is it atmospheric? When I write this, am I going to be able to create an entire world? Because when I am writing, that is what I'm sort of drawn to, is the setting and also the feeling and the mood. And this is true in contemporary romance as well. I think it's very easy for craft books to sort of skip over contemporary when we're talking about setting and mood and kind of go straight to fantasy or historical. But I think in contemporary, it's even more important because you want to differentiate the experience that your characters are having from any other characters. You know, why does a Megan Quinn book feel different from a Tessa Bailey book? You know, it's because even though they might be set in small towns, they write small towns very differently. And so that contemporary utilization of setting is very, like, it's something that I'm very interested in. And so if I feel like if I know what it's like to walk through a setting at, say, 11 p.m. when the fog is covering the streetlights, like that's when I know it's a story that I can write because I can feel it. I can feel the mood of the story.
Yeah.
Does that involve a lot of research trips to misty, foggy places, Sierra?
I
Just
mean, not as many as I would love, but yes, I remember before I wrote Thornchapel, I visited Dartmoor for a week with a couple girlfriends, and I was so grateful that I went on that trip because it was so different than it was in my head. It was one of the places that I've been where I was like, this is not at all what I expected. And then sometimes, you know, I hold space for, like, I go someplace for work and then I don't know that it's going to be a setting, but
Yeah.
I'm so captivated by it that it becomes one. So when I was in Sydney several years ago, we had a chance to go out to Hamilton Island and, you know, spend a couple of days there with like giant birds trying to steal our food. And it was so interesting and beautiful, and one of those places where extremely important and famous people like go vacation, right? And then you kind of see like what it's like for people who actually live there. There's like this pretty stark divide. And so like very interesting sort of like class tension, you know, just inside this really
Yeah.
beautiful location.
Yeah.
And then so I got approached to write an anthology like a year later, and I was like, this setting has been inside of me and it just hasn't had a story yet. And now it has a story. And so I feel like it kind of goes both ways. Sometimes you visit a place and it kind of hangs around inside of you until it's ready. And then other times you sort of know you know what you're looking for. I need a small town. And then the question becomes, you know, how do I refine that into something more specific?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's interesting. And so, because sometimes I forget about the setting and the mood when I'm writing, and I'm not, it's something I have to remind myself. So it's interesting to me that is so integral to your kind of process. I really like that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I have to pull back sometimes because sometimes I'm like, it doesn't matter what kind of tree is outside the window, you know, like it
Yeah.
actually doesn't make a difference. But for me, I'm like, but I have to, it might feel different if there's, you know, an oak tree versus a yew tree. They're very different kinds of trees. So maybe the character is going to feel different. You know, I
Yeah.
feel different when I look at different trees. And then my co-writer, Julie Murphy, is like, it really does not matter.
I know.
that's
I'm the other
nice.
way around. I write too much character-driven stuff and I forget about the scenery. I'm the other way, and I need to
Yeah.
focus on that more, you know?
Yeah. But but that's all just different writers writing different things, and different things are
Yeah.
important to each of us. So that's cool. But maybe we don't have to write any differently to what we
That's
are
right.
writing,
Maybe we
and
just
it's
got to do
fine.
us. Yeah.
Yeah. So are there any other things? So we've got these three things that you know that you need to incorporate into a story to kind of make it compelling to you. Is there anything else that you do that's sort of slightly different, or that kind of is off track? Or is it just that because you are writing these kinds of stories, it's just wherever that takes you? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that this sort of process is very difficult to do at the very beginning of your writing career because you are you almost have to have a couple books under your belt to sort of be able to look back and say,
Yeah.
this is who I am. But I would say that like a very essential ingredient to sort of crafting your own path is starting to become more like yourself and starting to sort of have some certainty in the kinds of stories that you tell and what your voice is like, because you are going to start getting advice, and sometimes well-meaning advice, like I had about, taking religion out of my books, and marketing advice, packaging advice. You're going to start getting well-meaning advice that is not going to fit you. But you can only, I think, know that it doesn't fit if you know yourself, And so I this is not sort of a paint by number sort of project to know yourself, but I do think that doing something like having a friend kind of go through your books and say like, oh, I've kind of pulled out these themes. Having a friend, don't do this yourself if you're a sensitive person, but having a friend kind of go through your Goodreads reviews or your Amazon reviews to pull out sort of phrases that happen a lot. I've seen authors do this with word clouds. Well, they'll scrape all the reviews and they'll put it into kind of a word cloud generator. So they can see things like spicy, tender, comforting, or edge of your seat, those kinds of descriptors to kind of reflect back to yourself, like, what is it that my readers are experiencing in my books? What promise am I making to readers with my books? What kind of author promise am I making so that when they pick up the next one, they may not be expecting another romance that is the same in tropes or settings. So they might not be expecting another Navy SEAL small town romance, but maybe they are expecting high heat level. Maybe they are expecting a lot of banter, expecting these things that sort of transverse genre that aren't necessarily about what we write, but about how we write. And kind of anchoring yourself in like, this is who I am as a storyteller. This is what's interesting to me. So that way, when you get advice that says, you need to write one series that has 17 books in it so that you can do all these sort of tricks with, having the first book free and doing this and that and this. Um, you can say, okay, but like I know for myself I can't do 17 things in a row and still be
Yeah, yeah.
interested. Or I know for myself that I would rather write story series that have like four concurrent love stories that you're getting in the same time rather than a series where there's one, couple per book. And so knowing yourself gives you the sort of fuel to assess the writing advice and see if it's a good fit rather
Mm.
than sort of reflexively feeling like we're all sausage makers in the sausage factory and all the sausage machinery should work the same for all of us.
Yeah.
And I that only comes, I think, retrospectively being able to have a few books to look back on and say, okay,
Yeah.
this is me. This is what I love to do.
This is
I
who
was
I
going to
am.
say, actually, how long into your writing career did you get this epiphany and be able to go forward with it?
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Cheryl, because it brings me to something that I credit a lot towards my sort of journey and knowing myself, which is in 2018, I went to the RWA conference in Denver, Colorado, and I heard Dr. Jennifer Lynn Barnes speak. And for anyone who doesn't know, Jennifer Lynn Barnes was a professor of psychology, but she specialized in the psychology of fiction and fandom. So a lot of her work was really around why are we drawn to fiction? How does fiction work on us? And how can we sort of make our books psychologically more appealing? It's a great talk. It used to be for sale on rwa.org. I don't think it's for sale anymore. But you can, if you Google Jennifer Lynn Barnes RWA or the phrase writing for your id, you should pull up some blog posts from people who were there and they kind of summarize some of the stuff she talked about. But to kind of put it in summary, her theory is that fiction is we're drawn to it because it's packed full of pleasures, and that the sort of the more pleasures you put into your book, the more energizing it is for readers to read. And there are some pleasures that are kind of universal. So she talks about competition, beauty, danger, touch, wealth and resources, these things that sort of everyone is kind of universally drawn to. And it doesn't have to be from a positive standpoint. So I use The Hunger Games as an example of that is a story about wealth and resources, and it's a story about how they are mismanaged, to put it lightly, like how like the contrast between the Capitol and District 12 in that story is giving us this really magnetizing lens into how deprivation is affecting these people, how poverty is affecting people, like, right? And like we feel like a sense of justice and anger that these people are suffering. And so when I say things like beauty or wealth and resources, like there is sort of the reverse side of that that's just as appealing. I think one of my favorite historical series is Lisa Kleypas's The Wallflowers.
Oh, yes, my
And right, and
favorite.
like yeah, and the wallflowers, it's all about, right? Like they're not the sort of diamonds of the first water. Like there's
Yeah.
various reasons why, they're not considered beautiful or desirable. And the story is kind of exploring how they are actually beautiful and desirable in the eyes of their heroes, and so you're kind of pulled into this idea of beauty, but from the other side.
Yeah.
So the when I say these sort of universal pleasures, I hope that it comes across as like expansive, not that every person we need rewrite has to have a symmetrical face and billions of dollars. Um, and but there's also specific pleasures too. There are kind of pleasures that you like that maybe aren't universal. I use the example of, for me, I just love a scene where two characters are playing chess. Like, I don't care if they hate each other. I don't care if they love each other. I don't even care if the chess game makes sense to the plot. Like, I just love to see like Professor X and Magneto playing a chess game. And for me, anytime I see that in a book or a movie, I'm just riveted because there's just something about it that I really like. There's no like reason for it. There's no pathology for it. I wasn't like locked in a room with a chessboard when I was younger. Like
Yeah.
and so it's just I just for some reason I find that really fun. And I know that there are other people like me, like for example, the people who make the X-Men movies. But I also know lots of people who are like, that does nothing for them. Like
Yeah.
the characters could be playing Monopoly or they could be coloring a coloring book.
Yeah.
And for them, the scene would achieve the same thing. So there are these pleasures that are a little bit more localized or smaller in scale. And during the talk, Dr. Barnes had us do this activity where we just started writing down things that we love in books and movies and TV and things that, whenever we see them, we're like, oh God, I love it when a hitman comes out of retirement, or I love a ragtag team, that like all these unlikely heroes kind of banding together to make a heist happen or something. I love a heist. So we all sat down and we wrote down these pleasures of ours, and that's how I started building my I call it my id list, and I keep it to this day. It's on my phone. It's long now. It's very long. Every time I'm reading a book or I'm watching a movie, I pull out my phone if I see something that I really like oh, a hedge maze. I love hedge mazes, and I put that in there. Um, but one of the things that I took away from this talk, aside from this like really great framework of like id and pleasure, was that the books that unabashedly pack the most pleasures into them tend to be the most successful books. Whether they're successful on the order of like Colleen Hoover, or they're more successful as like a cult classic, which I tend to be more of like a cult classic kind of author, they still experience this like longevity and this breadth of appeal. And that was fascinating because as I mentioned earlier, I majored in creative writing. And what we learned in creative writing was subvert, subvert, subvert. Do the unexpected. Don't be cliche. Don't be overly indulgent. If you have long sentences full of adjectives, take out all the adjectives, right? Like your verbs and your objects should speak for themselves. Just like this very sort of masculine lit fic kind of thinking. And I had unintentionally been sort of fumbling my way away from that mindset. But listening to Dr. Barnes talk, I realized that I could do the things that I had done accidentally on purpose. I could do it with
Mm.
intention. I could look back at the books that had already really found a readership and say, okay, what is it about them that found a readership? They're indulgent. They are playful. They are pleasurable. They're packed full of these story pleasures. I didn't apologize for having, this, and this all inside of one
Yeah.
book. I just went for it. I made sure that every scene was pleasurable to write. And so that thinking, that permission, I guess, was really a light bulb moment for me where I realized that I was still kind of carrying this feeling like a book has to stand up to some kind of test of intellectual rigor, and it's going to look like the author was so restrained,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
one day when I die on my tombstone, they'll put she was so restrained, they'll chisel it right into the stone. And it was like, oh, not only do I not want to do that, but that doesn't even actually work as like
Mm.
craft advice if your goal is to reach readers.
Yeah.
If you want to reach your readers are going to be electrified by your specificity and your ability to give them so much of what they want that they didn't even know that they could get this like bargain buffet of everything they love inside of one book.
Yeah.
And so that was like really I really feel like I walked out of that conference as a new author, and just totally changed my outlook on
Yeah.
creativity.
I love that.
Wow.
I heard
That
her
is so
speak.
cool.
We all did. We all heard her speak at the 2019 Romance Author Mastermind. And it was a very similar thing where I felt like previous to that talk, I felt like I had to do certain things, and then she gave you free rein to figure out what you loved as an author and to try and put more of that in. Yeah, it was kind of freeing in that way. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that like, even the practice of keeping your own id list is such a good opportunity for self-reflection on what are the things you love, even if they're small things, even if, I really love a hero with giant hands. I don't know why. I just like it when they have, giant hands and like a water bottle looks like a Barbie toy and they're giant hands. And it gives you sort of a chance to be like, A of all, how can I put this in what I'm writing now? And B of all, like what do I like about that? And like what are other things similar to that I like? Oh, I like wrists. I like forearms. Okay, my hero is always going to have rolled up sleeves, no matter what. And the thing that I really love about approaching creativity from this standpoint is that then it makes marketing downstream so much easier. Like that's not my primary goal. My primary goal is to write books that I love and that, hopefully my readers will enjoy too. But when you're like, oh man, I love big hands and I love rolled up sleeves and you put it in the book just because you love it, when it comes time to release your book and you're making your little graphic on Canva where it's got the book and the arrows with all the tropes, you can be like rolled up sleeves, big hands for no reason. And it makes marketing easier because now all of a sudden you have all of these talking points. If you go on Book Talk and you kind of scroll through, what are readers reacting to? They're never reacting to the most restrained, serene scene. They're always reacting to, and then he pounds on the door in the middle of the night and
Yeah.
says, "Who
Yeah.
hurt you?" Like they're reacting to him going, "You're my wife. She's my wife."
Yeah.
Like they're reacting to these indulgent moments that are just packed full of just, oh, like
Emotion
they're
and
so
yeah.
indulgent. Yeah, emotion and playfulness or edginess, whatever the valence is, whether it's light or dark, like it's always these moments that are just so indulgent that any lit fic writing professor would be like, oh, that's too much. Pull back. That's a stereotype. That's too cliche.
Yeah.
And we all know what we like after we've read those moments, because
Yeah.
when we read them and we
Mm.
feel different afterwards. We're like, wow, I
Mm.
really felt
Yeah.
that scene,
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, that's like I had just reread Devil in Winter a few months
Oh,
ago,
I love
and
that
there
book.
are I mean, there's just so many moments where she just sort of swings for the fences with those characters, where
Yeah.
she goes all in
Yeah.
on the characters that she built earlier on in the series, and it creates this incredibly
Oh, so
tense,
good.
passionate story. Yeah. And so like, but I feel like it would be so easy to have those characters and play it safe, and try to sort of pull back because we just feel like, oh, that's what a responsible author does. We should
Yeah.
be irresponsible. That's what I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
Permission to be irresponsible.
Brilliant.
Yes.
That's good. And I think doesn't matter what genre, doesn't matter what kind of characters you're writing, whatever. If there's something that you can connect to, like those moments that give you pleasure, that's gonna always be,
Yeah.
yeah, what gets you there.
Mm.
So So that's an awesome strategy that you've been using, like you're using the id list and all those kind of things. What else do you use, or what else do you do to kind of um do you just ignore the naysayers, for example, the people that tell you that you have to do things a certain way, or are there ways that you can kind of keep yourself on track and
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that I sort of use as, as a rubric is now that, I've done it for a little while, I can sort of identify people who are kind of my readers. And so I can ask myself, like, does this work for my readers? So for example, I'm trying to think of like this isn't like a misstep in a real way, but I think it's kind of a good example of like how you can kind of diverge from the brand you've made. So my best friend Julie Murphy and I started writing Christmas raunch coms together. It's been a ton of fun. Chapter one opens with a suitcase full of adult toys. Like we launch right in by chapter one. Um, but the cover that our publisher gave it is incredibly cutesy, like very demure, very sweet, kind of cartoon, pastel colors kind of cover. And that is a decision where, I had my readers say to me, I didn't know that, that there was raunch inside of it. I thought that this was going to be kind of a sweeter, more closed door kind of book because the cover sort of conveyed that. And then I had readers who were new to me and picked it up because they thought it would be sort of like an Abby Jimenez level of heat. And then it was way hotter. And they were like, oh my God, I bought that for my grandma. And I did not know. Um, and so that was a situation where, in conversations with my publisher, I was able to say, I'm concerned that like my readers are, going to have a certain reaction to this. And they said, well, we think we can sell a lot of copies with a cover like this. And so they obviously kind of like won the day in that conversation. But it was a really good example of I knew because of the data I had from publishing that there was a certain kind of marketing promise that that cover was making that we weren't necessarily keeping, that we were keeping a different promise that the readers, weren't going to know about just from the packaging. And that sort of sense of certainty comes from, having published for a while. But I do think that you can go deeper than just how your readers are going to react to something, and you can go back to yourself. And so that's really my primary source of certainty. And I use that word so much, and it's so funny because I'm like the most uncertain person I know. I feel like I'm constantly engaged in self-interrogation. But for me, it's almost instinctive or almost intuitive when someone gives me, writing advice or even like inside of a story, editorial advice. And I just kind of immediately feel like, no, it's not right. And it kind of takes me a little while to think about it, to kind of catch up to like, what is the sort of gut feeling that this isn't the right move. But I have learned to sort of listen to that intuition. And there are times that after I kind of like unspool something, I can see like, oh, I could apply this advice, but I have to do it from a different direction or in a different way to sort of make it fit myself. I think one of the most important questions you can ask yourself when you're on a story or a series level is, why did I start writing this series in the first place? So just like that, that author who was helpfully saying, if you take religion out of it, you could be so much
Yeah.
more successful. For me, it was like so immediate, like, oh no, but that's why, that's why I wrote this. If she wasn't going to become a nun, there would be no story for me personally. Like there wouldn't be any there. So I have to kind of go back and say, what was my original inspiration? And is this taking me away from my sort of original like conviction to tell the story, my original sense of playfulness? Is the thing that they want to take out like something that I just really love? And
Yeah.
that I maybe it's about the whole book is just people playing chess
Yeah.
in space or something.
Yeah.
And someone's like, we don't need space chess is too much. It's a hat on a hat. Like just have one or the other, space or chess. And I'm like, but I wanted to put these two things together because like they're two of my ids and I wanted to fuse them together. If I take out one, like the story is just gonna feel is going to feel
Yeah.
less than. And I don't think that we should have to justify the, like this is why I'm drawn to this story, this character archetype or this, this trope or something. And so those are usually kind of the things I start circling back to. Like, is this actually about my lens as a storyteller? Is this something that is going to take away from my love for the story and my sense of playfulness while I'm in this sandbox, then I don't think it's great advice. But then there's other kinds of advice that I really don't care about. So that, if people I don't care about sports at all. Like people talk about sports to me and I pretend to care for like 3 seconds and then I'm out. And my husband always jokes because he'll watch football, UK football. And my favorite team, I don't know their name, but I call them Fly Emirates because that's what's on their jerseys. I'm like, oh, Fly Emirates is playing. That's great. It'll be like, oh yeah, so and so is really good this year, and I'm already walking out of the living room. I don't care anymore. And so if I was writing, say, a lacrosse romance, and someone said, "Have you thought about making it rugby?" I would be like, "Sure, fine." Like, I mean, that's the kind of thing that is not going to probably the heart of why I started telling a story. On the other hand, I have a friend who is writing a Formula One book. I think that she actually just sold. And if someone went to her and said, "Can you turn Formula One into NASCAR or dune buggy racing?" She would have been like, "Absolutely not. Formula One is the id. Formula One is what excited me about this story in the first place." And so I think assessing what are the elements that are like truly essential to the story, and then what are things that like, yeah, I could go either way on that, Like it's kind of like when people ask me if I want pizza or, Mexican for dinner, and I'm like, either sounds delicious. I really don't have a preference. Like any even bad pizza is good pizza. Just get me a pizza. That kind of element is something where if I get editorial advice on it, I'm happy to change it. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm super recalcitrant and I'm like, no one can ever give me advice. But I do have a much stronger test for things that people want to change that I'm really passionate about inside the story.
I think
Yeah.
that's really important too, because we talk about writing to market and or just going with the flow, but ultimately it has to be what you're comfortable writing and how it feels when you're writing. Because if there is no passion or if there is no joy, the story is not going to be particularly good anyway. I don't think. How can it be?
No,
If there's no love
I
in
I
it. Yeah,
I agree. If you don't love it, how can you
yeah,
expect a reader to love
Yeah.
it?
yeah,
And I also really like, yes, the market is sort of this like force that we're all engaging with, and I do, even though I don't write to market by, by definition of my brand or whatever, I always keep an eye on it. Like I'm always kind of interested to be like,
Yeah.
oh, Cozy is finally coming back. All these years Cozy has just been lying in wait, in mystery, and now it's
Woohoo.
finally able to creep up into sci-fi and fantasy, and good for Cozy. And so I like keeping an eye on it, but also because I've kept an eye on it for so long, I can say Cozy writers have been under the radar making a living all this time,
Mhm.
and so now I'm seeing articles in Publishers Weekly that are like, what is this, Cozy, the new trend, and kind of making it sound like it came out of nowhere. But no,
Yeah,
readers who loved Cozy have been reading it and buying it enough for lots of people to make a very comfortable living, even a six-figure living, writing what they loved and what their readers loved.
Mm.
But even though it wasn't breaking the Kindle top 100, doesn't mean that there's not a living to be made there. And so we all engage with the market. We all have this understanding that, like, when we talk about writing to market, we usually mean writing to things that are ranking on the top 500 or 1,000 on Kindle, the things that are on in caps at the bookstores. But I also just sort of like in my lowercase d democratic mind of like, we can all make our own way. I also believe in our power to make our own market. There are authors who started writing things and there wasn't a market there. Ruby Dixon started writing, fuzzy aliens, and there wasn't really a fuzzy alien romance market there. She made that market and she made it a huge one. And so, like, we have the power to draw in our own readers and, kind of start creating our own little wells of gravity and space time towards what we already love to do. And so I kind of, to me, that's a very empowering feeling. Not that like the market is sort of this, jet stream that we all have to like live our lives around, but that we can add to the ecosystem. We are participating in building the ecosystem too.
Yeah.
Sarah, can I ask, are you hybrid publishing or how do you go
Yes.
about, and if you are, how do you go about selecting which projects that you look after yourself and what you put out?
Yeah, so I am hybrid published now, and I will say the experience of indie publishing for several years was the reason I've been able to have a very like comfortable and invigorating experience in traditional publishing because now I am able to sort of advocate for myself and my story ideas in a different way. I'm able to advocate for my own brand, in so much as what the mishmash of things that I am can be called a brand, but I'm able to sort of clearly say my reasoning why I want something and I'm not afraid to push for it because I have I'm the proof of concept, right? Like I've
Mhm.
done these things on my own now and so I can say, "Hey, I know that like this is the kind of blurb that my readers tend to like. This is the
Yep.
kind of marketing that they seem to like because I've done it on my own, so I have some data behind that. But that said, I do still really believe that indie publishing is a really powerful tool for people who are writing things that are a little bit off the beaten path. And that's because publishers are hampered by sort of the structure of a publishing company, which means they only have so many publicists, they only have so many marketers, they only have so many interns quietly crying in the basement, when they receive
Yeah.
a PDF from me that's full of like markups. They only really have so much bandwidth that they can allocate towards one book. And so what that means is over the decades, publishers have gotten really, really good at sort of assessing what kind of category and what kind of energy a book has, and then using some sort of, kind of template to help market that book. And this works really well for books that sort of squarely fall into those categories. So a traditional publisher, they know how to sell a rom-com. They know how to sell your sort of standard kind of murder mystery. They know how to sell standard kinds of fantasy. Like they're really good at it. It's when you start getting closer and closer to the edges of these categories, these things that are sort of more hybrid things, in the beginning of cozy romantasy or cozy sci-fi, or even like the very beginnings of romantasy. Like Sarah J.
Mhm.
Maas sort of like built that tent, but for a long time, traditional publishers weren't filling it up. It was these authors on the fringes who were like, yeah, we want like dragons, but also like five chili peppers. Like we're gonna write those books. Um, these sort of things that are crossover or very, very, very niche, like I'm trying to think of a certain example, but like space chess, right? Like if I wrote
Yeah.
my space chess romance,
Yeah.
that would be like five Amazon subcategories down from your sort of standard sci-fi.
Yeah.
And so the more individualized your book is, the harder it is for a publisher to sort of adjust an existing template to it. And I think it's easier in that case to sort of go it on your own because you might not initially have the same kind of distribution, but you can guarantee that the cover, the blurb, the messaging, all of it is accurately reflecting what's inside of the book. And you can focus your energy on finding your specific readers. And in traditional publishing, there is very much still this idea that readers are fungible, that sales are fungible, that we're just trying to get sales and readers at any cost, that all readers are the same and can be exchanged. And that's not true because all of us authors know, but also us readers know that you can find 100 readers and sell 100 books, and then you can find that one right reader who's going to sell 700 books for
Yeah.
you because
Mhm.
they're going to be the one to go on Book Talk and gosh, they're going to be the one to write the really long review on Goodreads that gets a ton of
Yeah.
votes.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to find just any old reader because they might read your book and say, okay, that was nice. I don't need to read anything from their backlist. I don't need to talk to anyone about this book. I'm not going to bother to read a review. I'm not mad that I bought it, but like I don't have any further that I want to add to the conversation. But if you find your readers, the people who are going to spread your books like gospel, then that is worth so much more. I'd
Yeah.
rather find one of, these missionary kind of readers than 100 readers who are going to read the book and then forget about it.
Yeah.
And so when you're indie, it's like you miss these opportunities for distribution, but then you're free because you don't have to pay for an office in Manhattan. You don't have to pay for the interns crying in the basement. You don't have to pay for the bad coffee on floor 3. And so you don't have this overhead, which gives you this freedom to say, okay, I'm going to take a risk on this kind of cover. I'm going to take a risk on having a sale, even though the book's only been out 3 months. And I can take these gambles because I'm trying to find a very specific kind of reader, and publishers are never going to take those gambles. So for me, that assessment really comes from how close to the edges of a category or how far down in subcategories is this idea. Because if it's closer to the top, if it's closer to the middle, then I think there's some really like valid reasons to consider traditional publishing. And I personally, I'm biased, but I think being hybrid is sort of the best of both worlds, right? Like I have a lot of freedom to chase after projects that maybe wouldn't be a good fit for traditional publishing. But then I also know that almost any library is going to have my book on a shelf, that the library digital collection are going to have my audiobooks. These kinds of ways that I can be sort of even more present while I'm still being weird in the way that is the reason why I do this job.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Love that.
Perfect.
I really like that. So you talked a little bit, you skimmed over the idea of branding and saying that you had a mishmash of stories and things, but I want to talk about that for a little bit because I do feel like there is a cohesive brand around Sierra Simone, and if you're, if any of our listeners are in that sort of same circumstance, how could they go about kind of creating that cohesive sense of that there's this, I don't know, series of books that maybe they'd read between, or just because it's Sierra or however they are.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I really feel like when we talk about branding, it's very easy for those YouTube videos, for those classes, those little like download, sign up for my newsletter and you'll get a 5-page PDF about branding, and I really feel like it's easy for those conversations to drift like to these very sort of shallow places, right? To like, what do you want your website to look like? What about your tagline? What's your author tagline? And for me, branding always starts back in the storytelling. So if I'm doing a branding exercise with an author, I'm like, let's go back to who you are. Because if your brand is organic to you, then that's like half the work done, right? Like you don't have to sort of be like, okay, I write sassy small town romance, and these are my Pantones are pink, purple, and light blue. And now I feel like every book I write sort of has to match the promise of this brand, even if I don't feel like writing a book filled with like banter right now, or even if I want to write about this one hero's little sister going into the big city instead of being in a small town, but now I feel sort of like clamped in by this brand that I chose prescriptively rather than descriptively. That's something I talk about all the time because I'm like, be descriptive. Just describe what's already there, what's already simmering inside of you. Because the minute you start thinking about what you should be, what an ideal you would be, you're already going to have to start stretching yourself inside your storytelling and inside of your own marketing voice. It's going to be a lot harder to sort of be a dark, intense marketing person if normally you're like a very bright and bubbly person. You're already going to be stretching yourself into a box every time you have to write a newsletter or an Instagram caption. So I always advise authors to kind of go back to who you are and sort of like there are some questions that you can kind of ask yourself to start delimiting your storytelling voice and sort of ethos. And I'll ask things like, if you had to write a certain kind of book for the next 5 years, what would it be? And our friends who are able to write the same book over and over again, like this is a very easy question for them, right? Because they're like, oh yeah, no problem. Vampire Fae. Like I can do Vampire Fae for the next 5 years, no problem. For me, because I am a little bit more all over the place, I have to sort of change the kind of answer I would give where it's not bounded by a trope or a setting, and it's more like, is it transgressive? I could write taboo romance for the next 5 years and be pretty happy. Because for me, that's like I could do it in historical, I can do it in fantasy, I can do it in any kind of way, and it would still be sort of like taboo to me. And I can like pull up the volume on the taboo if I want, like I can go between, Misadventures of a Professor and Priest, and like I'm happy to write, smaller taboo, and then I'm happy to kind of go volume up to 11 on it. I think, what is a book that only you can write is another question that I'll ask authors. Like what it doesn't have to necessarily be experience in the sense that like, maybe you've always lived in the city, but you love writing cowboy romance. So it doesn't have to be, like you can only write people who have opal cards for the rest of your life. Like it can be, it can be something more expansive than that. But your sort of like fusion of interests and like for me, like I've always loved gothic fiction. I've always loved really taboo stories. I've always loved people who really should not get together, like Mr. Rochester and Jane Eyre. Like they
Yeah.
should not. Like a therapist would not advise that. I love those kinds of stories. And
Yeah.
so for me, that is like a lens that I'm always bringing to my stories. But I know people who are um very passionate about writing very sort of healthy kinds of romances. I know people who are very passionate about writing, say, queer romances for younger people who, because, those were the books that they wanted to see when they were
Yeah.
younger. I know people who are passionate about writing menopause into romance because, that's like something that they did not see and that they really wish they had, and now they have the power to write it in. And so I think what are the things that like I talked a little bit earlier about like the story doesn't need me, but like really like what stories need me? What are the stories that only Sierra Simone could write? And I don't mean that in like a I'm magical and special and only I can do this sort of way, but like just in like my approach to storytelling. And then what are stories that like, oh, Megan Quinn can have that one, or Tessa Bailey can have that one, or even like people who also write more provocative or kinky books like Sarah Kate, like there are things where I'm like, oh, that's for Sarah. Like that's a Sarah idea. It doesn't need Sierra, it needs Sarah. And so like what are the things though that really like call out for like a Sierra touch? And so asking yourself these kinds of questions, I think I am never able to like prescriptively like define what my brand is, in the sense that I'm able to be like sassy small town romance, but I can start carving out what my brand is not. I can start saying, oh, this is definitely inside the camp. This is definitely outside the camp. And so those kind of questions just sort of help me shape
Yeah.
things, but while also leaving room for nuance or for things to change. Because
Mm.
like I would tell you right now that I would never write friends to lovers like ever. Like you could kidnap my dogs and I would be like, I'll get new ones because I'm not gonna write friends to lovers. But that might change in 5 years. I might be like, oh, here's a taboo friends to lovers. He's actually her psychiatrist or whatever. And then I'm like, okay, now I can do it. Actually, that's not a bad idea. But anyway, put that on a post-it note for later. And
Yeah.
and I also think like just to sort of extend that idea of like I would never write friends to lovers. What are stories that you don't want to write? Like just knowing like,
Mm.
yeah, I'm never
Yeah.
gonna be the family drama is a key part of the plot kind of person. I'm never gonna be the her career, his career is a central part of the story kind of person. I'm never gonna be the whole story takes place in one small room. I want my characters to travel. I want them to be going to different settings. Like just knowing that about yourself, what you don't want to do, I think is also
Yeah.
really useful.
Mm.
And again, especially because the further you go on in your career, the more opportunities you have. And so there have been times where people have approached me with like, from really cool places that I would love to work with, but they want something that I'm just not interested in doing. Would you write a contemporary romance with no, provocative elements in it? Or we were thinking that you would be great for, I don't know, like a series of short stories or something like that, where I'm like, oh, I love short stories. I love a series of short stories, but like for me right now, like I think I would only be able to do it if I could co-write it with my friend, or I'd only be able
Yeah.
to do it if there was like an overarching story, those kinds of things. And so knowing what you're not interested in, I think is just as important as what you are. Knowing what
Yeah.
your brand is not, because otherwise it's very easy to get hoodwinked into um just sort of copy the successful author's brand, look at their
Mhm.
branding, look at their logos, and then just sort of, put your own twist on it. It's very easy to sort of be like, okay, I'm gonna be I'm trying to think. I'm gonna be older Chantal Tessier, right? Like I'm going to tell Chantal Tessier kinds of stories, but I'm going to do it with characters in their 50s. And and then to kind of get like two books into a series and be like, "Oh, I actually that like that doesn't match now." But I was
Yeah.
sort of like lured into that because I wasn't able to define for myself what I didn't want to do.
So it's really important to be true to yourself, isn't it?
Yeah. Whole lot of know
Yeah, which
yourself.
is
I feel
Know
like it's been
thyself.
going
yeah,
on
yeah.
this podcast.
Know
Yeah.
thyself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Awesome.
which is like it's so woo-woo,
Yeah.
so I feel bad because I feel like it's not like you can make a worksheet, that's sort of like here's how to know yourself. But I do think that sort of interrogation, giving yourself the opportunity to do it. And if you're not someone who's naturally very reflective, this is a great thing to do with like another writer to like sit down with each other and kind of
Mm.
ask each other these questions because sometimes
Mm.
someone else will be better at prompting you to dig deeper or to find an exception or even just to kind of clarify like, oh, I would never write friends to lovers. Like, well, why is that? Like, well, because it's never going to be, taboo or whatever. And so to kind of dig into that and make yourself clarify things. So do it with a friend.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Good
Advice for the
advice.
definitely.
bedroom and
Yeah.
for writing.
Good advice.
Awesome.
So I
Yeah.
think we're now rolling into the end of the interview. We've been on here for a wee while, but I just wanted to ask you, if there was one piece of advice that you could give an author listening to this, what would it be? What would you want them to take away from what we've talked about?
Yeah, so I would say that this is probably like kind of it's going to come off as grim, but I have done it, so I can say that it works. And it's that you can always change your name and start over.
Mm.
So, and I did this right from my first name to Sierra Simone, and what I learned about that moment, that transition, was that my contract was canceled, right? And in a lot of circles I was in that was like the death of your career. It was like if you got a canceled contract, it's so hard to come back from that. It's so hard to sell anything else. And I was like, oh, but I at that point I had already started the Sierra Simone, arm of my creative approach. And I was like, there's actually nothing stopping me from doing it again and again and again. Like I could have seven different names with seven different domains. And there was such a freedom in that because it meant there was no amount of failure, no amount of low sales, no amount of a bad release, nothing that could actually prevent me from writing and publishing again. The only thing that prevents me is me. And so if I want to keep writing and publishing, I can. Like that's in my power. If I want a blank slate, like a blank slate is just a new name again. And so that freed me from this feeling of like every release, every year has to sort of build on itself in this very, kind of capitalist expansive way that any dip in progress is like an inevitable sign that I'm not cut out for this career, that it's not meant for me, that it's going to end at any moment. Because the only thing like really between me and publishing another book is me writing another book because there's everything else is a solvable
Yeah.
problem. Your name, your website, your marketing, everything else is a solvable
Mm.
problem.
Yeah.
So I really would love to release us from the sort of weight of each individual book needing to have the kind of release and lifespan that feels like it's going to hold up our entire career. Instead, I would see ourselves as the engine of the career, not our individual titles. And in romance, this is easier, right? Because we all have backlists that are like, 20 books deep or whatever. And so there is a feeling in romance that it is my body of work that will speak for myself, not one individual title. But then when you get down into sort of business advice, it does get a very like, this needs to be your breakout release. And this needs, you need to sell as many as you did of your last book plus X. And you need to recover if it's not all of these things. It's very easy for us to get caught up in this idea that one title's success is us being able to do this again when really that's just not the case. Like my first covers were bartered covers. Like the cover I still have for Priest, I copy edited someone's book and they made a cover for me. Like I didn't pay a single a single dime. I beta read someone else's book and they copy edited mine. And so even cost doesn't necessarily have to be a barrier. You know, you can make a cover in Canva and you can run your book through Hemingway and spell check to, do your best. Like, I mean, I would always advise get your book professionally edited, but like really if it's I can't make money on this book, so therefore I don't have enough money to pay for the production of the next book, that doesn't even have to be a barrier. Really, the only barrier is us choosing it. And so I am here to say that I have done that. I have started over with a new name, and it was the best creative choice I've ever made. And it also happened to be the best business choice I could have made. And yeah, sometimes that happens. Like sometimes the
Brilliant.
thing that energizes you creatively is also the thing that will make money and sell copies. And I think we should just like embrace the hope that that will happen more often instead of feeling like those two things are at odds with each other.
That's
Awesome.
awesome. Thank you
Yeah.
so
I love that.
much.
It's a very uplifting and
Not so grim.
Brilliant.
wonderful.
Not as grim as I was
Can't wait to
expecting.
end. Yeah.
So if someone wants to find you or your books, where should they go, Sarah?
Yeah, so I have a wonderful friend and content manager who is mostly me online. So you can find my content on Instagram and TikTok at the Sierra Simone. It's that on Instagram and TikTok. And Flavia Vasquez runs my account, and she does a lot of my content. So if you DM me there, you will hear from Flavia, and she'll be like, "Hey, this is Flavia." But you'll be able to keep up with like news and updates and things. But if you sign up for my newsletter, that is me, that is moi. I actually am like a weird sicko who likes writing her own newsletter. I don't know. I like it. So if you sign up for my newsletter, you can also hear about sales and new releases, cover reveals, all that good stuff. And then a very easy place to find all of my socials and my newsletter is thesierrasimone.com. And then if you go to thesierrasimone.com, I actually am going to have to pull up the website so I can say the right words to you now. But I have collected some of the resources that I think are really useful for writers on my website. And if you go to thesierrasimone.com, sorry, I'm like talking to you as I'm typing it out. And you go up to the top and you click more. There is a page called Author Resources. And so I've gathered together some craft resources that I think are really useful. Some podcasts that Dr. Jennifer Lynn Barnes has been on talking about her theory of pleasures and ids. Some publishing and marketing things I found useful. And then also like planning and sustainability. I have my planner that I use on there and some other people who've got some really great like planning courses and planners for sale and stuff. So that's all there under author resources if anyone is just curious to find more.
Yeah, that's
Brilliant.
awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
much. Yeah.
And Shah,
Yeah,
where
thank
can
you
we
for
be
having
found?
me.
Oh,
Thank
it
you.
was just an absolute delight, and we could probably keep you on for at least another hour, but we won't. But
Yeah,
we could.
easily.
So I'll make sure that all those links are put into the show notes. So if you're listening to this on a podcast app or if you're on our YouTube channel, look through the description and you'll see those links for the sierrasimone.com. And we are at spargirlspodcast.com and we're on Patreon at Spark Girls Podcast.
Awesome. And thank you, Sarah. And thank you to all of our listeners for joining us for another episode of the Spa Girls podcast. We've enjoyed having you all here with us. We'll be back again next week with another episode. But for now, farewell.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.